You're watching TVC Breakfast. The Independent National Electoral Commission has declared PDP's Ademola Adeleke as the winner of the Osun Governorship Election. Despite expectations that the election might be marred by violence, there was relative peace and orderliness as Osun residents exercised their civic responsibility without any untoward event. Many have described the conduct of this election as a litmus test for the electoral body as the country prepares for the 2023 general election. Joining us via Zoom to discuss the outcome of the election is former chair of the Transition Monitoring Group and the Executive Director, Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center, Abiola Akiyode-Afolabi. It's nice to have you join us this morning, Abiola.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Great. And we also have the Executive Director, YIAGA Africa, Samson Itodo. Samson, good morning. Good to have you join us.
Very good morning to you.
Great. Now, let me start with Abiola in here before we move along. Now, you monitored the elections in Osun State. You saw how everything played out. When we talk about the process of the election, what would your assessment be in the regarding the process of the election, the outcome of the election? If you have to give pass mark, I wonder what the percentage will be, Abiola.
Well, good morning once again, viewers. I was at Osun over the weekend for the elections, and I need to say that I need to first congratulate the people of Osun for having a very peaceful election. I also want to congratulate the resident commissioner who handled that election. I think it was coming from a lot of experience, having done that over time in Osun State, and I think that also showed off in Osun State. By and large, I think the Osun State election showed significant improvement from even the Ekiti State election. And before the election, observers and well-meaning Nigerians have said that this election is going to be another litmus test, knowing fully that after this election, the next election will be the general election. So how this happens would help, in understanding what we are likely going to see in the 2023 election. I think by and large, the INEC really performed excellently well in this last election. I know that our observers went out very early in the morning, and some of them got there around 7, and even at that time, so some of the polling units have been set up. And if you recall that one of the challenges that we used to have with elections, it's delay in setting up, delay in arrivals of materials, delay in arrivals of even security agents that are supposed to be at polling unit. I think that was done effectively in Osun State. Very few places where we had, such hiccups. Then it's also obvious that the ad hoc staff were also trained, although we saw some of them that also still display some incompetency. But however, I think the large number of these ad hoc staffs that were deployed, performed excellently well. There are issues of the party agents. In most of this where we went, there were party agents, and some were even there as two, but the party agents cannot, the number of party agents that you see in polling units cannot be compared with the number of parties that were actually in that election. So some behave relatively well, but some also still behave in a manner that we still need to continue to talk to the political parties in terms of who represent them at the party agents. There are also issues around access to the polling unit, the question of secrecy of the votes. And I think that there's still a lot of improvement that needs to be done with regards to that in terms of ensuring that people cast their votes in secrecy. I would not really give a lot of pass mark to INEC in that regard, because the cubicles were still very much exposed, and we found some of those cubicles right in front of people's houses, which is also a significant issue even for vote buying, because people want to see, who you are voting for. And if there is no secrecy of the votes, it then becomes like a major problem. One of the big issue in that election is the use of technology, the effectiveness of the virus, which I think it's quite commendable, and also the way the election was transmitted, so everybody can see. As at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I personally have logged on to my computer and I was viewing it. So, which is really, really, and I think that if there's anything that really secured the elections, in the votes in Osun election, I think the technology really played a very big.
Okay, let me put you on hold and then get to hear from Samson Itodo. So, YIAGA has even gone ahead to release its own report saying that the result by and large reflects with that of the final result as announced by INEC. How does this also resonate with YIAGA's assessment of the general conduct of the polls?
Well, thank you very much. On election day, YIAGA Africa deployed 500 observers to a random sample of about 250 polling units. And that enabled us assess the quality, the integrity of the process. Before we speak on the results, we observe that the process is essential in determining whether the overall outcome of an election reflects the ballot cast. And when you look at the process, you begin with the opening of polls. The polls open early. Based on our data, the polling stations opened early. As at 7:30 a.m. on Saturday, over 79% of polling stations INEC officials had arrived. And by 8:30, in over 89% of polling stations, the commencement of accreditation and voting was recorded. So if you look at, logistical deployment, there was a marked improvement compared to Ekiti elections. You look at the accreditation and the voting process. Was it transparent? Were the BVAS machines, did they function optimally? Our data shows that in 100% of polling stations, INEC deployed the BVAS machines. In polling stations where there were over 750 registered voters, which is above the threshold that INEC set for allocation of voters to polling units, 2 BVAS machines were deployed to those polling units. But this was not spread across because we still went to some polling units that had over 2,000 and 1,000 registered voters, and there was only 1 BVAS machine. But the big question is, did this BVAS machine function optimally? And our data shows, just like we saw in Ekiti, the BVAS functioned optimally, and they were able to accredit voters, and voters cast their ballots in a free and in a peaceful manner. And our commendation goes to INEC for effectively managing the logistics for this election. There were isolated cases of procedural shortcomings, but our data also shows that these shortcomings do not in any way undermine the overall outcome. And based on our assessment and our results that we have in our custody, the results declared by INEC fell within the PVT estimates. Therefore, the results declared by INEC are a reflection of the ballot cast at the polling unit on election day. But there are fundamental issues that we need to address. The first relates to the conduct, of politicians and political actors in this election. There were still cases where there was overvoting. There were cases where there was violence. And I think at this point, we commiserate, with the INEC officials who were brutalized in the course of this election. In a particular polling unit, the head of an INEC official, an NYC official, was smashed by hoodlums. And the big question is, the police gave all the assurances that security will be provided for this election. How come did we still have this cause, of violence targeted at polling officials? If this is left to continue, we're going to have situations where polling officials, Nigerians, will not sign up, to conduct elections. And when you have a shortage of staff, we've got a big problem that we need to manage. The second critical issue that we also need to address is this issue of, vote buying, and the secrecy of the ballot. And Dr. Abiola just highlighted that it's a major source of concern. And in this post-election period, we've got to think about, ways of addressing this. But the two elections have been successful, but these are off-cycle elections. We've got a big one. We've got to conduct elections in 176,000 polling stations. Will INEC still exert this kind of oversight that it has for these two elections in the general elections? Our call to critical stakeholders is not to overestimate their capacity or underestimate the quantum of work that will be involved in delivering credible, peaceful, and inclusive elections and conclusive elections in the 2023 election. So we've got so many lessons we need to learn, but we are very optimistic that with the level of participation that we've seen in these two elections and the outcome and the role that technology did play, that we are actually on a course to conducting, a credible elections in 2023.
Well, my question is for both of you. And this issue of vote buying, what did you see? What did you observe?
Well, there was a lot of manifestation of that during the election. Initially, when it started in the morning, we didn't see much of that. And we were also wondering whether they had deployed new strategies in doing that. But by the time it got to around 11 o'clock, it became very obvious that the people who are going to sell the votes and the people who are buying the votes became very, very agitated. And you could see a lot of gathering around polling units where you can obviously see that, there were a lot of trading, going up in that regard. And we also saw a lot of people with notepad writing people's name, which also shows that they were trying to get people that voted for them. So it's one of the major problems that we're dealing with. Yeah, but even on that, even speaking on the issues of buying votes and all of that, one of the analysis that I had made is also that the truth of the matter is that the people who are ready to sell votes are still not, if you compare with the people who are not willing, who would want to play on the line and also vote without, being paid or trading on their votes, they are not as in terms of percentage. We have more people who are not willing to sell their votes, and so we saw also that played out in Osun State. You had quite a number of people who were standing on their line, queue, ready to vote without selling, while you see those who are trading, are also trading by the side. So meaning that we need to empower more people, to shun vote buying and also become people who can also protect, the mandates of the election, who also watch the way the observers are watching, who can report, and of course also empower people who can also stand to prevent, vote buying. I think the security officials didn't do much in terms of, preventing vote buying, even when they saw it. And I could recall that one of the observers had called the attention of one of the security agents who could not define whether he had the capacity. But along the line, we also saw EFCC came into play here, and I think I witnessed about 2 or 3 places where the EFCC had picked up, people who are selling votes.
Yeah, what would you say to that,
Samson?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Abiola and Mr. Sam. Your question is, what did we see? We saw 2 major political parties, the PDP and the APC, procuring votes. And if you check our statement and our report, we did highlight, the amounts that they were doling out. In one of the polling units in Osogbo, we saw PDP agents handing about 2,000 to 5,000 naira to induce voters. In another polling unit in Orolu local government, we also saw APC agents distributing about 4,000 naira to voters. So these things did occur at the polling station. But I would also want to note the role that the security agencies played. And I agree with Dr. Abiola. EFCC was present, ICPC was present. We were also made to understand that these two agencies were included in the Interagency Committee on Election Security. And so arrests were made. But also to commend the Nigerian police. And quite frankly, for this election, we saw a high level of professionalism from our security agencies, especially the police. I was in a particular polling unit where I saw, and in this case is a policewoman now, who was enforcing, the secrecy of the ballot. And in places where voters attempted to expose their ballots, the police officer, the policewoman, and I have to single that for very obvious reasons, was asking the voter to stop exposing their ballot. So we would say that yes, substantially these security agencies performed optimally. But I also want to say that I think that in these places where votes were bought, and we still have these cases, the security agencies really need to do more in stemming vote buying. For arrests that have been made, we call for diligent prosecution of those who are currently in custody. So it serves as a deterrence to other politicians. But we shouldn't just focus on the perpetrators. Let's also focus on their sponsors. And there has to be consequence, for politicians who procure votes. It doesn't matter whether they deploy mercenaries, but we have to go beyond those mercenaries to targeting also their sponsors. But also this point about, the security management. And I'd say that, quite frankly, again, to the conduct of the police, in the build-up to the elections, the DIG hosted observer groups to a meeting where we discussed extensively what's the security arrangements for the election. I think that in the post-election period, there is need for that review meeting between the police as the lead agency and civil society. One of the commitment and the statement we got from the police was that the Amotekons were not going to be involved in this election. And we would like to report that based on our observation, they weren't actually involved in the election. And for the hoodlums, that invaded some of those polling units, though isolated, I think that we need to have a further conversation, with the security agencies about the extent of, the mopping of light arms and small weapons in the build-up to the elections. Yes, the police arrested cultists in the build-up to the election, just a few days to the elections. Yes, they mopped up arms based on the reports that we received. But I think the police would need to also do more to ensure that there's extensive mopping of arms so that hoodlums and thugs will not have access to these arms and intimidate and disrupt elections at the polling units.
Dr. Abiola,
just a follow-up. Were you guys able to assess, and I know this is a really speculative point, the extent to which this vote buying actually affected the fortunes of the parties? The results.
For me, I think it's premature to draw on that assessment. It would require some empirical investigation. It would also require a lot of review of the results. So I think in the days ahead, there is an opportunity to run that analysis. But I would say that, yes, we can confirm that vote buying did occur. The extent to which it occurred is something that would require, an analysis of several reports, both from state actors and non-state actors, before we can make that judgment on whether it influenced the outcome of the election.
Does this also replicate your opinions on the matter, Dr. Abiola?
Yes, I will agree with Samson on that. While I still feel that in terms of addressing vote buying, looking at the queues, there were actually people who were standing there, and you will know that these people were not interested, in trading their votes. So, and I feel that in going forward, I think that should be an area we should dwell in, because the reason why vote buying would also thrive is when people who want to vote without trading stand by and say that, well, after all, they are going to sell the votes and the vote will not count. So let's just allow them to do what they want to do. But as long as they are also ready to come out, and vote, I think, the intention might surpass those who really want to sell the votes. But just as Samson said, it was clear that the two major parties were actually involved in this. We even saw situations where people were holding phones, and it was obvious that they were actually using that phones to pay the money. So you might not really be that to say the cash. So you can also, when there can be electronic transmission of results, there can also be electronic transmission of funds for vote buying. So we saw that also, playing out there. So and the reason why this should be concerned is also that it's obvious that a lot of people are watching, to see whether vote buying it's occurring on election day. So what will happen is that they will start to deploy new strategies in ensuring, and that's why the placement of the cubicle, the secrecy of the votes, and the security of the votes becomes very important. Because while that is being done, one of the observers had, for example, reported that in a place where she realized that people were deliberately following up on the votes to see who you are voting for. So she had accosted the security agent there, and they had said, there was an agreement when they said that when A is coming to vote for party A, the party agent should move close to be sure. And she had asked why would that happen, and the security said, well, it was an agreement between them. So I think that people who are also in position of authority, like security agents, they must also be ready to addressing vote buying must be intentional. It must be something that we really want to do. If we don't have that coordination between INEC, security agents, and the people, to respond to it, it will probably be very difficult. It's been happening for a very long time. It's becoming more and more because of poverty and the economic situation. And that's why we also need to look at a much more holistic way to respond to it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Excuse me, Dr. Abiola Akiyode-Afolabi, the Executive Director, Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center. Thank you so much for coming.
Of course.
And we also thank you, Samson Itodo, Executive Director, YIAGA Africa. Thank you very much for talking to us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.